The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and despair, a sterile cage where Ethan Caldwell's world had shattered. At 17, he lay motionless, his legs betraying him, his heart pounding with a truth he could no longer hide. His father's fist had struck more than his body that night. It had stolen his future, leaving him paralyzed and alone. Ethan's eyes, a piercing blue, stared at the ceiling of St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester, New York. The memory of that night clawed at him. The shouting, the Bible thrown across the room, and the staircase that became his undoing. His father, Robert Caldwell, a man of iron will and unyielding faith, had discovered Ethan's secret, his love for another boy. The confrontation was a blur of rage. "You're no son of mine," Robert had roared, his fist connecting with Ethan's jaw. In the chaos, Ethan stumbled, tumbling down the stairs, his spine snapping like a twig underfoot. Robert didn't call for help. He walked away, leaving Ethan crumpled at the bottom, his body broken, his spirit teetering. Now, 3 months later, Ethan was a ghost in his own life. The doctor spoke in hushed tones about incomplete paraplegia and possible recovery, but their words felt like empty promises. His mother, Ellen, visited daily, her eyes red from crying, but she was powerless against Robert's control. The Caldwell family fortune, millions tied up in real estate and investments, was Robert's domain. And Robert had made it clear, Ethan would get nothing. Not a cent for medical bills, not a dime for the experimental treatments that might restore some movement. "You chose this sin," Robert had spat during his one hospital visit. "You'll live with it." But Ethan wasn't alone in his heart. Across town, in a cramped apartment above a diner, Liam Harper was fighting for him. Liam, with his messy brown hair and soft green eyes, had been Ethan's secret for 2 years. They'd met in junior year, bonding over dog-eared sci-fi novels and stolen glances in the school library. Liam was the one who made Ethan feel alive, who saw the world in colors Ethan hadn't known existed. Now, Liam was the one sneaking into the hospital after hours, holding Ethan's hand, whispering promises of a future they'd build together. "We'll find a way," Liam said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "We'll get you out of here." The problem was money. Ethan's medical bills were a mountain, and the experimental stem cell therapy his doctors recommended, a faint hope for regaining some mobility, cost more than most people earned in a decade. Robert's wealth could cover it 10 times over, but he'd rather see Ethan suffer than support a life he deemed unnatural. Ethan's only hope was to fight for his share of the family trust, a legal battle that seemed impossible without resources or strength. Liam, though, was relentless. He dropped out of community college to work double shifts at the diner, saving every penny for Ethan's care. He'd even started researching legal aid, spending nights poring over documents he barely understood. But the system was a labyrinth, and time was slipping away. Ethan's condition wasn't improving, and the hospital was pressuring Ellen to move him to a state facility, a place where hope went to die. One evening, as rain lashed the hospital windows, Liam slipped into Ethan's room, his jacket dripping. "I found something," he said, pulling a crumpled flyer from his pocket. It was for a pro bono lawyer named Sarah Klein, a woman known for taking on impossible cases. "She's fought for people like us before," Liam said, his voice trembling with hope. "She might help." Ethan managed a weak smile, but doubt gnawed at him. "Why would she care about me?" he whispered. "I'm just a kid with nothing." Liam leaned closer, his hand cupping Ethan's cheek. "You're everything to me," he said fiercely, "and I'm not letting you give up." That night, Ethan dreamed of running again, of feeling the grass under his feet, of Liam's laughter echoing in a world where they didn't have to hide. But when he woke, the hospital ceiling stared back, cold and unchanging. He clung to Liam's words, though. They were a lifeline, a spark in the darkness. The next morning, Sarah Klein arrived. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, her white skin flushed from the autumn chill. "I've read your file," she said, sitting beside Ethan's bed. "Your father's actions are unconscionable. If you're willing to fight, I'll take your case." Ethan's heart raced, a mix of hope and fear. "What if we lose?" he asked. Sarah's gaze softened. "Then we'll keep fighting," she said. "You deserve a chance to live, Ethan, not just survive." For the first time in months, Ethan felt a flicker of something he'd thought was lost, purpose. He looked at Liam, who stood by the window, his silhouette framed by the gray dawn. This was their fight now, not just for money, but for a life where love didn't come with a price. The road ahead was daunting, but with Liam by his side and Sarah in their corner, Ethan dared to believe they could win. Sarah Klein's office was a cluttered sanctuary of legal pads and coffee mugs, tucked above a bookstore in downtown Rochester. Ethan, now discharged from the hospital and living in a small, accessible apartment funded by Liam's savings, sat in his wheelchair across from her. The hum of the city filtered through the window, a reminder of the world moving on while Ethan's life felt frozen. Liam stood behind him, one hand resting lightly on Ethan's shoulder, a silent anchor. Sarah spread documents across her desk, her voice calm but urgent. Your father's trust is airtight, but not unbreakable, she said. He's using a morality clause to disinherit you, claiming your lifestyle violates the family's values. It's a disgusting tactic, but it's not uncommon. She tapped a highlighted page. We can challenge it under New York law. Discrimination based on sexual orientation is illegal here, and we can argue he's abusing his power as trustee. Ethan's fingers tightened around the armrests of his wheelchair. He'll fight dirty, he said quietly. He always does. Sarah nodded. He will. Robert Caldwell has deep pockets and deeper grudges. But I've faced worse. We'll need evidence. Texts, emails, witness statements. Anything proving he targeted you for being gay. Liam spoke up, his voice steady. I've got text from Ethan's phone. Before everything, Robert sent him threats. Told him to fix himself or lose everything. Liam's jaw clenched. I saved screenshots. Sarah's eyes lit up. That's a start. We'll also need medical records to show the extent of your injuries and tie them to his actions. Ethan, are you ready to testify? It won't be easy. Ethan's throat tightened, reliving that night in court, facing his father's cold stare. It felt like stepping back into the fire. But Liam's hand squeezed his shoulder, grounding him. I'll do it, Ethan said. I have to. Over the next weeks, Sarah built their case with relentless precision. She interviewed Ethan's mother, Ellen, who reluctantly agreed to testify about Robert's rage that night. Ellen was torn, her love for Ethan warring with her fear of her husband. He wasn't always like this, she whispered to Ethan one evening, her hands trembling as she adjusted his blanket. But he's changed. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Ethan wanted to believe her, but the apology fell hollow. She hadn't stopped Robert that night. She hadn't called for help. Still, her testimony could sway a judge, so Ethan swallowed his hurt and nodded. Meanwhile, Liam was a whirlwind. When he wasn't working at the diner, he was researching medical grants, contacting advocacy groups, or sitting with Ethan through physical therapy sessions that left him exhausted and in pain. One night, after a grueling session, Ethan broke. Why are you doing this? He snapped, his voice raw. You could walk away, live a normal life. I'm a burden, Liam. Liam knelt in front of him, his green eyes fierce. You're not a burden. You're my home. I'm in this because I love you, Ethan. Every fight, every sleepless night. It's worth it if it means you get to live. Ethan's tears fell, and Liam pulled him close, their foreheads touching. In that moment, the world's weight lifted, if only for a second. They were two boys against a cruel system, but they were together, and that was enough. The first court date loomed. Sarah warned them Robert had hired a top-tier law firm, one known for ruthless tactics. They'll try to paint you as a rebellious kid who provoked him, she said. We need to stay focused. Show the judge who you are, a young man fighting for his life. The morning of the hearing, Ethan woke to Liam humming softly, cooking breakfast in their tiny kitchen. The smell of pancakes filled the air, a small act of normalcy in a world of chaos. You ready for this? Liam asked, setting a plate in front of Ethan. No, Ethan admitted, his voice small. But I'm doing it anyway. Liam smiled, leaning down to kiss him softly. That's my fighter. The courtroom was a sterile battlefield, all polished wood and cold fluorescent lights. Robert sat across the room, his face a mask of disdain, his white skin pale under the harsh lighting. Ethan's heart pounded as he wheeled to the stand, Liam's presence behind him a quiet strength. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, listened as Sarah laid out their case. Robert's abuse, the trust discriminatory clause, Ethan's desperate need for funds to survive. Robert's lawyer fired back, claiming Ethan had been disobedient and provocative, that his injuries were an accident. But Sarah was relentless, presenting the threatening texts, Ellen's tearful testimony, and medical reports detailing Ethan's spinal damage. Ethan's own testimony was the hardest. He spoke of his father's words, the fist, the fall. His voice broke, but he didn't falter. When he finished, Liam's eyes met his from the gallery, a silent promise. We're in this together. The courtroom battle stretched into weeks. Each day, a grueling test of Ethan's resolve. The judge's face remained unreadable, but Sarah's confidence never wavered. We're gaining ground, she told Ethan and Liam after a session where Robert's lawyer stumbled over a contradiction in his timeline. The texts in your mother's testimony are strong. We just need to keep pushing. But Robert was a formidable opponent. His legal team dug into Ethan's past, twisting innocent moments into ammunition. They brought up a school suspension from freshman year, a minor prank involving graffiti, and painted Ethan as a troubled teen who'd push his father too far. Sarah countered with character witnesses: Ethan's English teacher, who praised his kindness, a neighbor who'd seen him volunteer at a local shelter. Still, the smears stung, and Ethan felt the weight of being judged, not just for his case, but for who he was. Liam was his rock. After each court day, they'd return to their apartment, where Liam would play old jazz records to calm Ethan's nerves. One night, as Billie Holiday's voice filled the room, Ethan confessed his deepest fear. What if we win, but it's not enough? What if I'm stuck like this forever? Liam sat beside him, their fingers laced. Then we'll make a life anyway, he said. You're more than your legs, Ethan. You're the guy who makes me laugh, who dreams bigger than anyone I know. We'll figure it out. Ethan wanted to believe him, but the fear lingered. The experimental treatment was a gamble. Doctors estimated a 30% chance of partial recovery, but without it, Ethan faced a lifetime of dependency. The trust fund was their only shot, and Robert was fighting to keep every cent. Outside the courtroom, life pressed on. Liam's diner shifts left him exhausted, but he never complained. He'd come home with stories of quirky customers, making Ethan laugh despite the pain. One evening, he brought a surprise: a small, battered telescope he'd found at a thrift shop. For when we get out of here, Liam said, grinning, we'll stargaze just like we planned. Ethan's heart ached with love and guilt. Liam was giving up so much: his education, his freedom, for him. You deserve better, Ethan whispered. Liam's smile faded. Don't you dare say that, he said, his voice fierce. You might better. The turning point came in the third week of the trial. Sarah uncovered a bombshell. A recorded voicemail Robert had left Ellen months before the incident, threatening to cut Ethan off if he didn't repent. The judge's eyes narrowed as the message played, Robert's voice dripping with venom. He's an embarrassment. He'll learn, or he'll lose everything. Sarah argued it proved intent, showing Robert's actions were premeditated, not a heat-of-the-moment accident. Robert's face remained stoic, but Ethan saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. For the first time, Ethan felt a spark of power. His father wasn't invincible. That night, Ethan and Liam sat on their tiny balcony. The telescope pointed at the stars. The city lights drowned out most of the sky, but they found a faint constellation. That's us, Liam said, pointing. 2 stars side by side, no matter what. Ethan's throat tightened. I don't know how to thank you, he said. You don't have to, Liam replied, kissing his forehead. Just keep fighting. The trial's final days were brutal. Robert took the stand, his voice calm but cold, claiming he'd only wanted to save Ethan. Sarah tore into him, exposing inconsistencies and forcing him to admit he'd never sought help for Ethan after the fall. The courtroom was silent as Sarah played the voicemail again, letting Robert's words damn him. Ethan watched his mother in the gallery, her face a mask of grief. She hadn't spoken to Robert since the trial began, staying in a motel to avoid him. Ethan wondered if she'd ever forgive herself, or if he could forgive her. As the judge prepared to deliberate, Sarah pulled Ethan and Liam aside. We've done all we can, she said. It's in our hands now. But I believe in you, Ethan. You're stronger than you know. Ethan nodded, his heart heavy but resolute. He looked at Liam, who gave him a small, determined smile. Whatever the outcome, they'd face it together. The stars above seemed to flicker in agreement, a quiet promise of hope in a world that had tried to break them. The judge's ruling came on a crisp November morning, the Rochester skyline glinting under a rare clear sky. Ethan's hands trembled as he wheeled into the courtroom, Liam's steady presence beside him. The gallery was packed, friends, neighbors, even a few reporters drawn by the case's intensity. Robert sat alone, his face unreadable, his expensive suit a stark contrast to Ethan's worn hoodie. The judge's voice was steady as she delivered her decision. The court finds that Robert Caldwell's actions constituted abuse and discrimination, she said. The morality clause in the Caldwell Family Trust is unenforceable under New York law. Ethan Caldwell is entitled to a share of the trust, effective immediately. A gasp rippled through the room. Ethan's breath caught, his eyes locking with Liam's. They'd won. The trust, millions that could cover his treatment, his care, a future, was his. Sarah squeezed his shoulder, her smile triumphant. You did it, she whispered. But victory was bittersweet. Robert stood, his jaw tight, and left without a word. Ethan's mother approached, tears streaming down her face. I'm so proud of you, she said, her voice breaking. Ethan nodded, but the distance between them remained. Forgiveness would take time. The money changed everything, and nothing. Ethan could now afford the experimental treatment, scheduled for the spring at a clinic in Boston. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but there were no guarantees. Liam, ever practical, began planning, researching the clinic, arranging accessible travel, even joking about sneaking diner food into the hospital. "No more Jell-O for you," he teased, making Ethan laugh for the first time in days. Life settled into a new rhythm. Ethan started physical therapy again, pushing himself harder now that hope felt tangible. Liam went back to community college part-time, balancing classes with his diner job. Their apartment became a haven, filled with small joys. Late-night movies, Liam's terrible cooking attempts, the telescope pointed at the stars. But the shadow of the trial lingered. Ethan still woke from nightmares, reliving the fall, his father's voice echoing. One evening, as snow dusted the city, Ethan found a letter slipped under their door. It was from Ellen, written in her careful handwriting. "I'm leaving your father," she wrote. "I can't undo what I didn't stop, but I want to be better. For you." Enclosed was a check. Her own savings, not much, but a gesture. Ethan cried, not sure if it was anger or relief. He showed it to Liam, who read it silently, then pulled Ethan close. "She's trying," Liam said. "That's something." Ethan nodded, but his heart was still tangled. He wanted to believe in second chances, but trust was a fragile thing. Still, he tucked the letter away, a small step toward healing. The months before the treatment were a whirlwind. Sarah stayed in touch, helping Ethan navigate the trust funds and connecting him with an advocacy group for disabled LGBTQ youth. Ethan began volunteering with them, sharing his story in small support groups. His voice, once silenced, grew stronger. He spoke of love, loss, and resilience, his words touching others who'd faced similar battles. Liam watched with pride, always there to cheer him on. One night, at a group meeting, Ethan met a young trans teen named Riley, whose parents had disowned them. Ethan listened, shared his own pain, and offered hope. "You're enough," he told Riley, echoing Liam's words to him. It was a turning point. Ethan realized he wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. His story could light the way for others. As spring approached, Ethan and Liam prepared for Boston. The night before they left, they sat under the stars, the telescope forgotten as they held each other. "Whatever happens," Ethan said, his voice steady, "I'm glad it's you and me." Liam kissed him, soft and sure. "Always," he said, "no matter what." The clinic loomed like a beacon, a chance at a new beginning. Ethan felt the weight of the past, his father's rejection, the fall, the fight, but also the strength of the present. Liam's love, Sarah's support, his own resilience. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living, fiercely and fully, for himself and for the boy who'd never left his side. Boston's spring air was sharp, carrying the promise of renewal as Ethan and Liam arrived at the clinic. The building was sleek, all glass and hope, but Ethan's heart raced with uncertainty. The stem cell therapy was a gamble, a chance to regain some movement, to reclaim a piece of the life stolen from him at 17. Liam wheeled him inside, his hand a steady pressure on Ethan's shoulder. "We've got this," he whispered, and Ethan clung to those words like a lifeline. The procedure was grueling. Days of tests, injections, and waiting, each moment heavy with what-ifs. Liam stayed through it all, sleeping in a chair by Ethan's bed, cracking jokes to ease the tension. "If you start running marathons after this, I'm not keeping up," he teased, making Ethan smile despite the pain. Weeks passed, and the first signs of progress came slowly. A twitch in Ethan's foot, a faint sensation in his thigh. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but recovery was a marathon, not a sprint. Ethan threw himself into physical therapy, pushing through agony with Liam cheering him on. "You're a badass," Liam said after a session where Ethan managed to stand for 10 seconds with support. Ethan laughed, sweat dripping, and felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. Back in Rochester, life began to bloom. The trust fund covered not just treatment, but a better apartment, one with wide doors and a view of the Genesee River. Ethan and Liam decorated it with thrift store finds, their telescope pride of place by the window. Ethan kept volunteering, his story inspiring others. Riley, the teen from a support group, became a friend, their shared resilience a quiet bond. Ellen visited often, tried to rebuild what was broken. Ethan was wary, but her efforts, small gifts, long talks, a promise to divorce Robert, softened his heart. One day, she brought a photo album, filled with pictures of Ethan as a child. "You were always so bright," she said, tears in her eyes. "I should have protected that." Ethan took her hand, a fragile bridge forming. Healing wasn't easy, but it was possible. Robert, meanwhile, faded from their lives. He'd moved to Florida, severing ties after the trial. Ethan heard through a cousin that his father was drinking heavily, his empire crumbling under bad investments. Part of Ethan wanted to feel pity, but the scars were too deep. He focused on his future instead, on Liam, on recovery, on the life they were building. One evening, a year after the treatment, Ethan took his first unassisted steps across their living room. They were shaky, halting, but real. Liam hooped, pulling Ethan into a hug that nearly knocked them over. "You're unstoppable," Liam said, his voice thick with pride. Ethan looked into his green eyes, seeing the boy who'd carried him through the darkest days. "We're unstoppable," he corrected, and they kissed, the world fading around them. The story didn't end with a miracle. Ethan's recovery was partial. He'd likely always need a cane or wheelchair for long distances. But it was enough. Enough to walk hand in hand with Liam through the park where they'd once dreamed of a future. Enough to speak at advocacy events, his voice steady and strong. Enough to live a life defined not by his father's hate, but by love, resilience, and hope. On a quiet night, under a sky blazing with stars, Ethan and Liam sat on their balcony, the telescope trained on the heavens. "We made it," Ethan said, his hand in Liam's. Liam smiled, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Yeah," he said, "and we're just getting started." Their journey wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a future where love triumphed over pain. Ethan had lost so much, his mobility, his family's acceptance, but he'd gained something greater, a life where he was enough, just as he was. With Liam by his side, he knew they could face anything. The stars above seemed to agree, shining brighter than ever, a testament to a love that refused to break.